The old soldier stood at the entrance of the town's most prestigious restaurant, his uniform crisp, his medals glinting under the harsh evening lights, and yet the door was quietly shut in his face. Inside, whispers curled like smoke as the staff turned him away, pretending the empty tables didn't exist. By morning, a single post would ignite a firestorm that no one could contain, a reckoning that would drag the whole town into the spotlight. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The Oak Ridge Grill wasn't just a restaurant. In a town like Riverbend, it was a symbol, a gleaming testament to aspiration, to Sunday bests and anniversary toasts. Families saved up for dinners there. Politicians shook hands over its gleaming mahogany bar. It was where success was seen, and being seen mattered more than almost anything else. When Harold Bryant stepped through the front doors that evening, he wasn't thinking about any of that. His jacket, heavy with the subtle wear of years, hung loosely over his frame. His service cap, brushed but frayed at the brim, sat square on his thinning hair. There was nothing performative about the way he carried himself. No conscious display of patriotism or entitlement. Just a man who had once crossed oceans for his country and now crossed a parking lot for a warm meal. The cool air conditioning inside bit gently at his weathered skin. The clink of cutlery, the low hum of conversation. It all spoke of a world he recognized but no longer truly belonged to. Behind the hostess stand, Madison glanced up from her tablet. Her manicured fingers paused mid-scroll, her expression flickering. Not with hostility, but something sharper. Judgment. A silent calculation. She leaned toward the manager, a man with slicked-back hair and a tie too tight at the neck, and whispered in a voice just low enough not to carry. Her lips curled in the faintest echo of distaste. Harold, unaware or simply unwilling to notice, approached with steady, deliberate steps. "Table for one, please," he said, voice calm but roughened at the edges, the way rope frays after too many storms. Madison straightened, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her black uniform dress. Her professional smile, practiced and brittle, slid into place. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, each syllable trimmed and polished. "We're at capacity tonight." From where Harold stood, he could see no less than 6 empty tables. He didn't point. He didn't protest. Soldiers know when a battle is already lost. Instead, he simply nodded, a movement so small it barely disturbed the air, and turned on his heel. The door seemed farther away now. His shoulders sagged, the proud square of military posture giving way to the quiet erosion of years and silent exclusions. To anyone watching, it might have looked like the walk of a man simply tired from a long day. But to those who knew better, it was the walk of a man who had been measured, found wanting, and dismissed without trial. At the window, a young couple froze mid-bite. Ethan Brooks, local journalist by trade, gripped his fork until his knuckles whitened. His wife, Claire, touched his arm without words. Ethan's gaze tracked Harold's retreating form, something acidic and sharp rising in his throat. He fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear but fury. Some stories write themselves, but this one demanded to be shouted. The cool night air pressed against Harold's skin as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the door to Oak Ridge clicking shut behind him with a sound far louder in meaning than in volume. He tugged his jacket tighter across his chest, feeling the frayed fabric catch on the calloused pads of his fingers. For a moment, he simply stood there, the neon glow of the restaurant sign painting the pavement at his feet in false, festive colors. Across the street, Ethan Brooks sat rigidly at his table, his coffee cooling untouched. His thumb hovered over his phone screen, the glow catching in his widened eyes. A war raged behind his expression, a hesitation that lasted no longer than a heartbeat before conviction won. With a few taps, he sent the words into the world. Vietnam vet denied service at Oak Ridge Grill tonight. Place was half empty. Welcome to 2025. It wasn't a rallying cry. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a quiet observation, wrapped in a sadness deeper than anger. The post didn't burst into fire immediately. Social media is a slow-breathing beast, sometimes taking hours to stir. But some words carry weight the algorithm cannot measure, and some injustices, however small in the eyes of the world, strike nerves too raw to ignore. By the time Harold had walked the 3 blocks back to his modest home, a one-story clapboard house with peeling paint and a porch swing that hadn't creaked with another person's weight in years, the ripples had already begun to spread. Inside, the house welcomed him with its usual stillness. Rows of carefully framed photographs lined the mantel, sepia-toned memories of a younger Harold in uniform, laughing with men whose names he still spoke to in dreams, but rarely aloud. His medals, polished more out of ritual than pride, hung in silent rows above a worn recliner. Harold didn't check his phone. He didn't have one. He poured a glass of water, stepped onto his front lawn, and turned the hose on the thirsty garden that had become his quiet project in retirement. The hiss of the water drowned out the distant hum of traffic. It was only when tires crunched over the gravel drive and he heard the deliberate click of a van door that he looked up. The local news station's logo was emblazoned across the side. The satellite dish on top pointed at the sky like a silent alarm. A woman in a blazer approached cautiously, microphone in hand, while a young cameraman trailed behind, adjusting his lens. "Mr. Bryant?" she called out. Harold straightened reflexively. An old habit. "We'd like to hear your story." He stood rooted in place, the hose still running, the water darkening a growing patch of earth by his boots. For a long breath, he considered turning away, letting it die quietly as so many small indignities had before. But then his eyes caught the cameraman's, barely more than a boy, earnest and uncertain, standing the way Harold himself once had in foreign cities where flags meant nothing and fear was stitched into every shadow. The thought came sharp and cold. If I don't stand now, who will? Harold closed the spigot slowly. Water dripped from the end of the hose like the last notes of an unfinished song. He set it down gently on the grass, wiped his hands on his jeans, and nodded once. Not for himself. For all the ones who had stood before him, and for those still learning how. It didn't take long for the quiet shame of one moment to detonate across an entire town. Within a day, Oak Ridge Grill's pristine reputation, once the crown jewel of Riverbend's social life, was a smoldering wreck. The first cracks appeared online. The restaurant's Google rating, once hovering proudly at 4.8, began bleeding stars by the minute. Reviews flooded in, not the cautious, diplomatic ones usually penned by disappointed diners, but blistering, furious condemnations. You turned away a man who gave you the right to run this business in the first place. Shame on you. My grandfather fought for this country. We will never eat here again. No excuse. No second chance. Boycott Oak Ridge. With each passing hour, more evidence piled up. Photographs of Harold's time in service, screenshots of news stories linking back to Ethan Brooks' original tweet, images of medals glinting proudly against the soft black of a dress uniform, the faces of fallen soldiers, the echoes of forgotten sacrifices, all marshaled now as silent witnesses against a place that had chosen comfort over conscience. In a panic, Oak Ridge's management scrambled to contain the damage. Their apology appeared late in the evening, a limp formulaic post on Facebook, hastily typed and riddled with the stench of corporate detachment. We regret any misunderstanding. Our dress code policy is intended to maintain a certain standard. We respect our veterans and honor their service. The town didn't buy it. If anything, the apology poured gasoline on the fire. The idea that Harold's service cap and well-worn jacket hadn't been standard enough for their marble floors and designer lighting turned anger into a bonfire of collective disgust. By the next morning, the scene outside Oak Ridge looked more like the aftermath of a scandal than a dinner rush. News vans crowded the narrow parking lot. Cameramen jockeyed for position near the entrance. Reporters swarmed the walkway, peppering questions at every employee who dared show their face. Madison, the once composed hostess, tried to slip through the side entrance, sunglasses low on her nose, but it was too late. Microphones caught her trembling hands. Flashing bulbs immortalized her panicked retreat. Her scripted lines, no comment. "It wasn't personal. I was just doing my job," sounded hollow against the roar of public outrage. The manager didn't even last the week. His resignation came quietly, tucked into the bottom corner of a local paper's police blotter section, as if shame could be buried under classified ads and court dates. And through it all, Harold Bryant tried to live as if nothing had changed. He watered his garden. He sat on his porch and whittled small figurines out of pine wood. He listened to the radio instead of watching the news. But change had a way of finding him. When the petition appeared, first as a suggestion on a veterans forum, then as a formal document with thousands of signatures, it was no longer a request. It was a calling. "Host a Veterans Honor Night," the petition demanded, "and make Sergeant Harold Bryant the guest of honor." Harold read the words in the letter delivered to his mailbox, the paper trembling slightly in his hands, not from weakness, but from the weight of being seen. For so many years, he had fought to live quietly, unnoticed. Now, he understood. Sometimes standing tall wasn't about seeking recognition. It was about refusing to let the world look away. The sun set slow and heavy over Riverbend that evening, washing the sky in bruised purples and molten gold. Outside Oak Ridge Grill, a line formed hours before the doors even opened. An ocean of people wrapped in denim jackets, military caps, faded uniforms pulled carefully from closets and hope chests. Old boots polished to a dull shine stood next to strollers, leather vests embroidered with service patches brushed against crisp Sunday dresses. The town had come out, not for the food, not for the spectacle, but for a reckoning. Inside, Oak Ridge had been transformed, as if desperate to shed the memory of its disgrace. Tiny American flags adorned each table. Handwritten thank-you notes from local school children were tucked into the folded napkins. The restaurant's logo on the wall had been temporarily replaced with a massive hand-painted banner. "Welcome home, Sergeant Harold Bryant." But no amount of bunting could erase the ghosts of the past 2 weeks. No amount of ribbon could bind up what had been broken. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Harold stood at the threshold of the restaurant, the heavy glass door propped open for him by the new general manager, a man hired in desperate haste, whose first official act was to bow his head in silent apology. Harold wore his full dress blues, the medals neatly aligned across his chest, the fabric tight across shoulders that had once carried wounded men through mud and mortar blasts. Each step he took inside was measured, deliberate. The world seemed to contract around him, the clatter of silverware fading, the low murmur of conversation dying mid-sentence. A single second of silence held the room hostage. Then, like the slow rolling of a distant storm, every chair scraped back. Every person stood. It wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't polite ceremony. It was instinct. Applause erupted, raw and rising, filling the rafters, shaking the windows. Some clapped with tears streaming down their cheeks. Some placed hands over their hearts. Veterans among the crowd snapped sharp salutes, the motions rusty but still full of fire. Harold's throat tightened. Not with pride, not even with sorrow, but with the unbearable ache of being remembered. He made his way to the central table, the one the restaurant had cleared, the one draped not in white linen but in the same flag he had once sworn to defend. He removed his cap with a trembling hand and set it on the table as reverently as a man placing flowers on a grave. A microphone waited nearby, but Harold didn't touch it. He didn't need amplification. Instead, he simply looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, weary, defiant, and spoke in the voice that had once called out in desert winds and jungle rain. "Thank you for seeing me." A few words, heavy enough to silence a storm. No corporate apology could have repaired the wound inflicted 2 weeks ago. But this standing, this remembering, this raw, clumsy, beautiful flood of respect was something even Oak Ridge's polished marble floors couldn't cheapen. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't rewrite the past. But it anchored Harold Bryant, at last, back into a town he had fought for, a community that, however late, remembered its debt. The applause rose again, not for spectacle, not for pity, but for a man who had stood alone once, and would never stand alone again.